Hey there, wake up. It's Means Morning News. Just after 11 a.m. on the East Coast in Washington, D.C., I'm the host, Sam Sachs. It's that Friday show. Good morning to everyone, especially Trader Joe's workers in Louisville, Kentucky, who just won their union election. This is the third Trader Joe's to be unionized. Also, good morning to Starbucks workers in Portland, who are trying to organize a union at the company's flagship cafe in the city. A viewer who is involved in the campaign informed us that a rally is planned for this Sunday at the Pioneer Square store. So if you're in the area, show up and lend some support. All right, time for the show. And we begin with some pretty bad news. Memphis police are set to release body cam footage today, showing 5 officers beating 29-year-old Tyree Nichols to death following a traffic stop. Based on the actions taken by the department already, one can imagine the video is going to be pretty awful. All officers involved in the killing have already been fired by the department and subsequently charged with second-degree murder, aggravated assault, and kidnapping. Now, this all happened on January 7th when police pulled Nichols over for alleged reckless driving. Police claim that Nichols tried to flee and that there was a confrontation during the arrest. But Nichols was left battered and bloodied, and he died in the hospital 3 days later. According to the autopsy, he suffered, quote, extensive bleeding caused by a severe beating. A lawyer for the Nichols family has seen the video. Antonio Romanucci said that it depicts a 3-minute beating, that Nichols was restrained, tasered, and pepper sprayed, and that you can hear him calling out for his mother as officers treat him like a, quote, human piñata. It was, quote, savage. Even the Memphis chief of police described the actions by her officers as, quote, heinous, reckless, and inhumane. Memphis and other major cities are now bracing for the public response to the video. Even President Biden released a statement Thursday night calling for demonstrations to remain peaceful. All 5 officers charged in Nichols' death are black, which might explain why they were charged so fast. Either that or the video really is just that bad. The nature of this case does disprove many of the claims by liberal police reformers, though. The problem is just a lack of community policing, that if officers simply looked more like the people they were policing, there'd be more trust. But police violence statistics show that the race of the officers really doesn't correlate with any reduction in brutality. A cop is a cop, and the entire policing system is rotten to the core. The only reforms that must come out of yet another senseless murder of someone by the police is to defund and disband. Finally, a quick update out of Atlanta, where Georgia Governor Brian Kemp is escalating tactics against Cop City protesters and forest defenders. Already, authorities have killed 1 activist in the Wilani Forest and arrested several others on bogus domestic terrorism charges. Well, on Thursday, Kemp declared a state of emergency and called up 1,000 National Guard troops to take on the protesters. And they'll be given the same powers as the police to arrest and apprehend people for as long as the emergency lasts, which the governor set until February 9th. Things are about to get really bad. Support the forest defenders any way you can. Bosses are always coming up with new ways to keep their workers disciplined. Take, for example, corporate healthcare provider Concentra, which provides concierge medical service to Fortune 500 companies and operates a number of clinics around the U.S. Healthcare workers at the company say an exploitative labor contract keeps them trapped at their jobs, It requires a 4-month notice before quitting, and if the worker doesn't give that notice, they have to actually pay money to Concentra. Serious. Good luck finding a new job when you're not allowed to start for 4 months. Of course, that's the point of this. If workers can't seek higher wages elsewhere, then there's less pressure on bosses to meet their pay demands. Bloomberg reviewed copies of Concentra's employment contract and includes, quote, a requirement that workers who quit compensate management for each day over the next 4 months on which they failed to provide services. It also includes a non-compete clause forbidding similar work anywhere within a 10-mile radius of their work location, a non-solicitation clause restricting them from trying to get other Concentra staff to leave, and a non-disclosure clause. Some of that stuff would run afoul of a new FTC rule in the process of being finalized that would ban non-compete agreements, which tens of millions of workers are subjected to. Also, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is considering rules against schemes that require workers to pay out of their own pocket for training and for quitting without notice. Concentra employees told Bloomberg that they were all subjected to the 4-month rule and that the threat of heavy penalties kept them from resigning, even as work conditions deteriorated, making them eager to leave. The Concentra contract is so abusive and one-sided, it's hard to see it holding up in a court if a worker actually challenged it. Then again, the judiciary is a cesspool of bootlicking judges who relish a chance to screw workers. Israeli Defense Forces massacred 10 Palestinians during a raid on the Jenin refugee camp in the West Bank on Thursday. One elderly woman and 2 children are among the dead. At least 20 other Palestinians were injured, according to the Ministry of Health. Eyewitnesses say that occupation forces targeted an apartment building where resistance fighters had allegedly taken positions, but Israeli troops also attacked a community center and a hospital. It was the deadliest raid in the West Bank in years and comes on the heels of the deadliest year in decades for Palestinians in the area. According to Mondo Weiss, 173 were killed in the West Bank in 2022. The outlet also reported that so far in 2023, 29 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli gunfire. Jenin has long been a target of Israeli security forces and the site of numerous assaults on Palestinians. The murder of journalist Shireen Abu Akleh last year by IDF forces took place outside the Jenin refugee camp. This latest raid fits in with the apartheid government's strategy of brutalizing the Palestinian people in hopes of provoking a reaction which the IDF can then use to justify even more heavy-handed attacks. You saw that overnight on Thursday when the Israeli military launched several airstrikes against targets in the Gaza Strip, allegedly in retaliation for 2 rockets that were fired from the area. The Palestinian Authority announced it was ceasing security cooperation with Israel in response to this latest round of violence, and that it will file complaints with the UN Security Council and the International Criminal Court. Several nations called for a UN Security Council meeting today to address the escalation in violence. Meanwhile, as all of this is happening, the U.S. is fully cooperating with the Israeli military as part of a massive exercise underway this week to simulate an attack on Iran. Next week, humans will look into the night sky and with their naked eyes see a green comet. And the last time that this comet was seen that close in our sky, Neanderthals were looking at it. Yeah, it was the Stone Age. Comet was discovered last year. Astronomers have sort of given up on giving celestial bodies cool names, so this one's just called C2022E3. It goes on a 50,000-year journey just to make one orbit around the sun, and it transits mostly through the Oort cloud, which is just a bunch of loose planetary materials at the edge of our solar system out beyond Pluto. The comet's green color comes from its carbon atoms that glow when they come into contact with the sun's ultraviolet rays. You can see it with a telescope now in the northern hemisphere sky, But in the middle of next week, the comet will make its closest approach to Earth, coming within 27 million miles. And then it will disappear again for another 50,000 years. I wonder who or what will be looking up at it then.
From parts unknown, Jesse Madman Madsen!
Everybody knows what this sport is. It's fixed. If you don't believe in what you're doing, none of them fans are gonna believe it either. We all do it because we love it. It's so hard to explain exactly why.
You all have made us live our dream.
What's up, brother?
Wir sind das Team in der ESA, das sich mit dem Problem des Weltraumschrotts beschäftigt. Sowohl mit der Erforschung, der Erfassung und auch der Lösung des Problems.
It's an environmental problem, like climate change. This week it will not change your life, but it may change your life over decades.
Sei es Navigation im Auto, sei es die Wettervorhersage, Klimaforschung, Fernsehübertragung, Telefongespräche, vieles geht über Satelliten. Und wir müssen uns klar sein, dass diese Infrastruktur im Raum momentan in Gefahr ist.
Friends, it's that time of the week when we name and shame rich dicks. Let's see who you all nominated on social media. We got a nomination for Big Egg. This is related to the story we brought you earlier this week that major egg producers jacked up the price of their product simply to maximize profits, all while lying and claiming that it was because of the bird flu. These companies made a fortune over the last year while everyone else had to pay $5 for a carton of eggs. Real dick move. Got a nomination for California Governor Gavin Newsom, who's pledged $750 million to sweep homeless encampments this year. This is a guy who has seen homelessness increase under his watch and has no idea how to adequately fund services to get people off the street and into safe shelters and homes. Instead, he's just going to give money to cops to harass people. Pathetic. Got a nomination here for UFC boss Dana White, long known for exploiting and underpaying his fighters, also associations with far-right political figures, and a history of spousal abuse. He has a new venture called Power Slap, where people slap each other and likely inflict brain damage. It's brutal. Dana White sucks. Let's see, we've got a nomination for the military-industrial complex, which takes out a ton of natural resources to make war machines, all while U.S. citizens go hungry and struggle to pay for basic needs. And wrapping things up, we of course have our standing nomination for all the goddamn landlords, Rona also throwing in the judges and attorneys who enable them. Thank you all for the recommendations, all very strong contenders, but this week's rich dicks are tech CEOs. 2023 is getting started with some of the nation's biggest tech companies announcing mass layoffs. Google announced it's going to cut 12,000 jobs. Thanks to Craig, by the way, for nominating Google CEO Sundar Pichai. Amazon is getting rid of 18,000 employees. Microsoft laying off 10,000 workers. Microsoft one was really dickish because just a few days before the announcement, the company flew Sting out for a private concert for executives. IBM is letting go of almost 4,000 jobs. At the end of last year, Meta announced it was laying off 11,000 people. I could keep going here. Salesforce is cutting 10% of its staff, Hasbro 15%, Spotify 6%, Vimeo 11%. You know, if you run a company and you hire all these people, and then suddenly the company finds itself needing to fire all of these people, you should be the first to go. You failed somewhere along the line as the CEO. The workers did not. And yet, the CEOs of all these companies still have their jobs. At Meta, it wasn't the workers' idea to invest billions of dollars on a clunky virtual reality system where you can do your banking, I guess. That was Zuck's idea. And yet, when the metaverse went bust, Zuck didn't suffer. 11,000 workers did. But, of course, what's driving this isn't CEOs acting evil. It's CEOs acting as they're supposed to, maximizing profits. And as long as executives steer their companies toward profitability, their job is safe. Capitalism demands it. There is no room for morality here. And nowhere is that more obvious than what's happening at digital media outfit BuzzFeed. In December, it announced it would cut 12% of its workforce in response to, quote, challenging economic conditions. But a month later, the company said it was investing in AI software now to create content. CEO Jonah Peretti told staff this week that in 2023, quote, you'll see AI-inspired content move from an R&D stage to part of our core business, enhancing the quiz experience, informing our brainstorming, and personalizing our content for our audience. But what the company really likes about this shift is that it doesn't have to pay for health insurance of an AI chatbot. But again, Peretti is just doing what he's supposed to be doing in this capitalist system, which places profits for investors over workers' livelihoods. BuzzFeed stock shot up 150% on news that it would be relying more on AI labor. Again, the problem isn't a bunch of assholes in a boardroom, it's systemic. Replace the assholes in the boardroom with other people, and you get the same results. Then again, this is a rich dick segment, so it's okay to personalize it a bit. Which brings us to Jennifer Tejada, the CEO of a San Francisco company called PagerDuty. She informed employees that 7% of them would be laid off, only she never said the word laid off. The announcement was filled with euphemisms and, get this, a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. The memo to employees was titled, Improving PagerDuty's Operational Resilience to Achieve Our Long-Term Vision and Goals. And in it, she condescendingly refers to workers as Dutonians. And instead of admitting she's eliminating jobs to maximize profits, she says, quote, the reality of today's volatile economy requires additional transformation. Tejada refers to employees losing their jobs as merely being impacted by this transition. The worst part about it is that MLK quote. Tejada actually wrote to employees, quote, I'm reminded in moments like this of something Martin Luther King said, that the ultimate measure of a leader is not where they stand in the moments of comfort and convenience, but where they stand in times of challenge and controversy. Is she referring to herself here? Is she the leader in that quote? Well, here's where Tejada stands in this time of challenge. According to ExecPay, her salary shot up 98% in 2022 to $13 million. So even though the volatile economy meant that the company needed to save money through mass layoffs, Tejada herself didn't need to make any sacrifices. She just made a shit ton of money last year. How's that for the measure of a leader? Tech CEOs, especially Jennifer Tejada, this week's Rich Dicks. Let's see what the working class pulled off this week in history. Opening up the archives, and we begin in 1913 with the great struggle of the garment workers of Rochester. 10,000 clothing makers went on a strike demanding higher wages and changes to working conditions. Large chunk of the strikers were women, and they were militant as hell. They fought with the cops and marched around closing other stores by encouraging the workers inside to join the strike. Dozens were arrested or injured during police riots, and one woman, Ida Brayman, was shot dead by a shop owner. The strike would drag on until April, and by then factory owners had already given in to some of the demands, promising a 52-hour work week, overtime pay, and holidays. A settlement would eventually be reached that prohibited factories from discriminating against union members. It was the largest garment strike in Rochester's history. Moving ahead now to 1918, when socialist revolutionaries seized control of Finland and briefly established a worker state. The Red Forces took over major cities in the country and created the People's Republic of Finland. The new government immediately put in place pro-worker reforms and equality measures, but capital fought back, organizing counter-revolutionary forces known as the Whites, and plunged the nation into a civil war. Shortly after the revolution, Finnish socialists lost a key ally in the Soviet Union, which withdrew support for the revolutionary government as part of an agreement with Imperial Germany to end World War I. German units then invaded Finland to support the counter-revolutionary forces. A white terror descended on the country as the armies of capital slaughtered, by some estimates, 100,000 workers. By May, the worker state had been toppled. All right, staying in the same decade, this week in 1919, the first strike at Fort Leavenworth Military Prison was in response to abhorrent conditions and overcrowding. Inmates at the facility refused to do their daily work assignments. The passage of the Espionage and Sedition Act 2 years earlier led to the government jailing a large number of anti-war activists, labor organizers, and conscientious objectors at Leavenworth, right alongside soldiers who committed war crimes and stuff. Strikers wanted the establishment of a grievance committee and a panel to review sentences, which led to 60% of people at Leavenworth having their sentences reduced. The grievance committee was established and did improve the lives of inmates, but a second strike would rock Leavenworth later that summer. And finally, let's fast forward all the way to 2006, when mass protests took hold in Turkmenistan after the nation's president proposed pension cuts. It was the first major protest in the country since the breakup of the Soviet Union. And there were reports that even just the news of the pension cuts caused many elderly people to fall ill. And some protesters committed suicide in front of administrative buildings to protest the change. The demonstrations continued in major cities, and the unrest led to a new government reversing course a year later, not only keeping the pensions in place, but adding more benefits. To learn more about these stories and a bunch of other stuff that happened in working class history, follow the project on Twitter, listen to the podcast, and subscribe on Patreon. Back with more next week. We're leaving you this morning with a sunrise from New York. It was sent in by Mev at Rochester General, where last summer nurses won a union. Enjoy. Thanks, Mev. I'm done for the morning. Thanks for watching, and thanks to the team behind the scenes. Please subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channels if you haven't already. One day, capitalism will fall. Until then, we're going to be right here. See you next week.